I was born in a small town in Missouri where everyone knew everyone and nothing really happened. Although the days were typically uneventful, it made for a peaceful life where children played freely and parents were typically unconcerned about their kids roaming around the neighborhood. My friends and I divided our time between playing at a nearby park and gathering at each other's houses in the afternoons. One day when I was about 5 years old, I told my mother that I was going down the street to my friend Emily's house to play. My friend's house was on the cul-de-sac at the end of our road, and I had made the walk by myself 100 times. I remember the scene that afternoon like it was yesterday, probably because it was my first truly strange and unusual experience. I noticed that it seemed oddly quiet while I was walking down the street, despite the fact that it was a bright sunny day. There were no kids, there were no parents outside, there were no cars pulling out of the driveway, there were no lawns being mowed, nothing. But I was 5, so I probably wasn't that observant, and I really just remember going on kicking the rocks down the street, as if the silence was no big deal. I looked up briefly to see how close I was to Emily's house, and after seeing that I was about 20 feet from her driveway, I went right back to kicking the rocks down the street. I had only been looking back down to the ground for a few seconds when I heard this horrible, low, guttural growl, like right in front of me. I stopped dead in my tracks and slowly looked up. Standing there at the end of Emily's driveway was a huge black dog. It had blood red eyes, and its irises were so dark that the pupils nearly blended in. The beast was baring its teeth at me and snarling as it locked its gaze right on me. I was terrified. Where had it come from? There was an empty open lot next to Emily's house where there was nothing that an animal that size could have hidden behind. Despite my fear, I could not look away from that animal's demonic eyes. I took a few cautious steps backwards, never breaking my stare. The dog lowered its stance, tightened its muscles, and prepared to lunge at me. Not knowing what else to do, I spun on my heels and I took off running as fast as I could towards my house. The second my feet hit the pavement, I heard that monster's nails scrape the cement as it launched itself after me. With every step I took, my fear just grew and grew. I could hear the hound's heavy breath each time it lurched its enormous body closer and closer to me. My adrenaline surged and forced my little body to run as fast as I possibly could, faster than I ever knew I was capable of. I managed to leap onto my front porch, tear open the screen door, and I dove inside just in time to slam the front door shut. With tears streaming down my face, I screamed to my mother, "It's out there! It's gonna get me!" My mother was washing dishes and she jumped as I burst in the door. She said, "What's out there?" Suddenly, something absolutely enormous crashed into the screen door hard. We both jumped and I screamed and ran and hid behind the chair in our living room. My mother just stared at me looking very concerned and started towards the front door. As she walked over and reached for the doorknob, I loudly begged her not to open the door. She insisted that it was absolutely fine, but I was not convinced, so I ran to the top of the stairs. Our stairs were open, so I sat at the top step and I peered through the gap, horrified as I waited for my mother to open the door. She paused for a second, and then she whipped the door open fast. Of course, there was nothing there. No weird dog, no vicious drooling beast. There was, however, a fairly sizable dent in the screen door where something very large had clearly bashed into it. We had both been startled by the thud that had created the dent, so it was undeniable that something had definitely been out there. My mother looked at me with a kind of concerned inquisitiveness on her face at seeing the dent, but that look quickly changed to disbelief when I began to describe my encounter to her. She believed that something had crashed into the door, obviously, but she was more concerned that it was just some aggressive dog or a sick dog guarding its territory or something completely explainable like that. The problem with that theory was that Emily didn't have a dog, and I knew all of the pet dogs in the neighborhood because their owners were all of my friends. I had never seen any animal like that. Plus, this dog's eyes were not bloodshot. The whites of its eyes were solid red. It didn't seem sick, and it certainly didn't run like an ill or injured animal. Many people that I have told this story to have said that I encountered a hellhound. To this day, I'm still not certain if it was a hellhound that came after me that day. But one thing I am positive of, that thing was not of this world.